Many of us who deal with dissociative conditions can look back on a lonely childhood. It's a cliché for a reason, a common enough scenario to find a child who was isolated by an abuser from extended family, neighbors, community members, and friends. Not allowed was a phrase many of us learned to say on repeat from a very early age, and those around us looked on with pity in their eyes when they heard the words. Wishing they'd do something about the signs they were seeing didn't make it happen until, for some of us, help finally came. Not for me, though. I was with my abusers until I was 18 years old. I find it deeply ironic that lonely childhood is a common marker for dissociative disorders when by the nature of dissociation, we create in our mind extra personalities who we can't escape from. With enough mental discipline, we can even learn to interact with them. For us, there is never a quiet moment. There is never a silent hour. There is most certainly never a lonely day. I understand that for many, this companionship is looked upon as a burden, a curse, a sign of brokenness, or some sort of parasitic invasion. Initially, I felt much the same way. I remember, vividly, the first time I recognized a loss of time. I must have been 9 years old, and I was being yelled at and berated by my mother for drawing on the side of the refrigerator with a green crayon. I'd written the name Sam over and over. While normally my mother's rages left me cowering in fear, anticipating the physical violence or other unpleasant consequences to follow, that day I remember just standing there in a stupor, confused, because I recognized my handwriting, but I had absolutely no memory of writing the name. More incidents like that one followed, although it didn't take me long to figure out that it was me, that for some reason, there was more than one me inside my head. My awareness of Sam soon followed an awareness of Beth, Aaron, Ben, and Galahad, and others would follow as I grew and matured. In my very isolated childhood, they were the one thing my mother couldn't take away from me, and even if they sometimes did things I didn't want them to do, I still kept it a secret, because I was afraid that if anyone knew about them, they'd be taken away. I was still too young to understand that there was no way for them to be taken away. As time wore on, some alters grew frustrated with the secrecy, and in retrospect, I believe they grew frustrated with the abusive situation we were all trapped in. Ultimately, I asked my mother for help. I asked her for counseling. What I got were threats to be sent to a mental institution. A few months later, I would find an unlikely confidant in a woman I knew from church who seemed to see how much I was hurting. It wasn't quite counseling, but it was enough. More importantly, it introduced me to the concept of the 5 love languages. I don't have time to really go into a deep lecture about this, but I would encourage those of you who don't know what your love languages are within your plural system, to get online and just search for the 5 love languages quiz. It's free. Now, to summarize for the purposes of this lecture, the principles behind the love languages are that each of us give and receive love in one of 5 ways primarily. Those are words of affirmation, acts of service, quality time, receiving gifts, physical touch. Now, this is not to say that if you are primarily a physical touch person, that you don't feel loved by quality time, just that you feel it more with touch. The quiz provides a ranking system, with percentages, to help you figure out which of those things most help you feel love, and which ones least do. For example, I feel very loved if somebody tells me, "Good job." That's a words of affirmation thing. On the other hand, gifts are just gifts. I appreciate them, sure, but I don't feel loved by getting them. An important thing to understand here is that with love languages, the opposite is equally true. So to continue using myself as an example, if my primary love language is words of affirmation, and somebody telling me, "Good job," will make me feel loved, then somebody calling me a worthless idiot will hurt me beyond belief. However, since gifts do nothing for me, you could give me nothing for Christmas, even if we were best friends, and I would not feel hurt by that. The final key thing to understand about love languages is that it is easiest to give love in the manner you best receive it, and hardest to give love in the manner which you least well receive it. Let's suppose that I have a good friend whose primary love language is gifts. Mine, as we've established, is very much not gifts. My first thought would be to shower my friend in praise as a means to make them feel good if they're having a bad day. However, if they are not a words person like me, that won't mean much to them. If I buy them a small gift, on the other hand, I'll make their day. In order to best meet the needs of those you are in relationships with, you not only need to understand your love languages, but you must understand theirs as well. This point is where we circle back to the subject of dissociative disorders. I promise, there will be an
Ha!
in a few minutes. As with any well-constructed thing, a good foundation is paramount. Learning about the love languages changed how I interacted with my alters on a fundamental level. I had already identified the fact that they were different and separate from me, and it occurred to me that if that was true, then perhaps they had different love languages than I did. So, one by one, each alter took the quiz. Some tested similar to me, and some completely different. Beth, in particular, was dramatically different from me, and it took a good deal of work for her and I to begin seeing eye to eye. I won't say that it wasn't work, but every relationship is. While most of the teenagers I knew in high school were focused on who was cute and who was dating who, I spent my free time staring at a wall as conversations played out in my head, heated debates between so many voices, each wanting to be heard and seen. The first hurdle was the blackouts. My mother's threats to send me to a mental institution were a looming source of terror for me throughout my teenage years, especially after I began having nightmares to that end. I knew that if she ever found out about the fact that I was losing time as much as I was, she'd have shipped me off, for my own good, before I could blink. Beyond the blocking of a traumatic event, dissociative amnesia is, in my experience, simply the result of a violent switch as one consciousness fights to move forward at the same time as another is fighting to remain present. The solution, in this instance, is as simple as removing the fight. Each alter required certain concessions, means to have their love languages met. For Sam, I took up martial arts as a means to get physical touch, and as a healthy outlet for her violent impulses. For Beth, I agreed to once a month wear the very fashion-forward clothing she preferred and to make more effort to be social, at school for her quality time needs. For Erin, it wasn't a love language she required to be met, but rather a concession that she'd not forcefully assert unless I was putting our shared body in harm's way, that she could be the sense I clearly lacked, citing my daredevil tendencies. For Ben, who also needed quality time, he asked to spend time working in the garage with my father, on his Corvette. Galahad, a gifts person, enjoyed going to the local antique market and simply wanted the freedom to make small purchases now and then. I won't say it happened overnight, but it did happen. I agreed to the things they asked for, and in return, they gave me the respect of not fronting by force. The first few years, there were good weeks and bad weeks, but to be perfectly honest, I found direct correlation between if I'd made time to give an alter the attention they needed and how much of a jerk they were that week. Before I get some of you saying, but my system is so much larger, so is mine. The ones I've named are just a few to give you examples. Not every alter requires big things, and I've found that with a little bit of creative thinking, I can often meet the needs of more than one alter with one activity. For example, if I go to thrift store, Beth is thrilled to look at clothes, Galahad is thrilled to look at vintage dishes, and Erin takes great pleasure in spotting valuable things that, as she puts it, some idiot was stupid enough to donate. 3 alters, 1 activity. The trick is learning to include them, instead of trying to lock them away. Another good thing to pinpoint for each of your alters is what their primary trauma response is: fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. Again, I haven't time for a full lecture on that principle, but I will attempt to summarize and explain why it is important to identify each alter's trauma response, separate and unique from the host's own trauma response. I believe that it is often forgotten that while alters are created in the wake of trauma as a means to cope with trauma, that does not negate the fact that they themselves are still in a position to respond to trauma, same as any other person. The fight response is fairly self-explanatory. Those with this trauma response, when confronted with conflict, react in anger, defensive posturing, and often with violence. In the case of alters, it is my experience that these are the alters who are unusually vulgar, rude, or sexually promiscuous in their attempts to dig themselves out of what they view to be a corner. They will use any means necessary to gain the upper hand. As far as they are concerned, vulnerability is not an option. The flight response, again, is decently self-explanatory. Those with this trauma response react to conflict by using any means possible to escape said conflict. These are the runners. These are the people and alters with high anxiety problems, chronic panic attacks, who will do what they can to avoid the conflict in the first place where possible. They are the perfectionists who work hard to maintain a status quo, in hopes that if they do, conflict never comes. The freeze response is more common to the host than to an alter. This response is where dissociation is found, a trauma response in which the person simply ceases to cope altogether, checking out of reality instead. The freeze response is also characterized by feelings of depression, shame, and of physical symptoms such as literally freezing in place, unable to move in the wake of something terrible happening around you. Another common physical response is to simply space out and become unresponsive to outside stimuli. The final trauma response, fawn, is characterized by a complete disregard for self-care. When a person or alter finds it difficult to put themselves first, or might be referred to as a people pleaser, or struggles to say no, or set other appropriate boundaries, then they are exhibiting signs of the fawn response. Much like the love languages help you to meet your alter's emotional needs, identifying your alter's trauma responses helps you to, step by step, piece by piece, heal from your collective trauma. While by definition of dissociative conditions, each alter is very much different, ultimately they are all suffering from the same trauma that the host is. They have all been through the same thing the host has. However, addressing the healing process for the host without addressing the healing process of the alters becomes counterproductive, if they continue to carry the trauma that the host is attempting to get beyond. I believe the principle of final fusion therapy works under the idea that one should shove all of the alters together first, and then heal the whole person. I think that's backwards. I get a fair bit of pushback for this opinion, but I don't have a lot of confidence in the idea of final fusion. It sounds nice, in theory, but in exactly the same manner that alcoholics are told that a recovering alcoholic is still alcoholic, a person with DID who has achieved final fusion is still going to be predisposed to dissociative episodes. Without developing the skills to deal with alters in a healthy, functional way, a person with DID who goes the route of final fusion is a person who will always be living in fear of the day that they break again. Putting in the work to form healthy relationships with your alters, and giving them the tools to each work through the trauma that you all face together means you are free from fear. Normal was 5 exits back on a one-way street, but healthy is forward and very possible. Attitude is everything. No relationship starts out easy. It takes time and effort but in the end offers rewards beyond imagining. I'm 33 years old. The last time I had a major blackout, I was 19. I wasn't diagnosed with DID until I was 21. I ended up in counseling for depression, and as a routine question, "Do you hear voices?" was asked, and by then, I was long past my fear, so I answered honestly. My reaction to the diagnosis was basically, "Didn't know there was a word for that." The psychiatrist was astounded that I'd never been diagnosed or medicated previously, but didn't argue with me when I said I didn't need meds. When I say it's possible to live functionally with DID, I don't mean that it's possible with the right cocktail of drugs, or with some magic bullet therapy you'll pay a kidney for. I'm not special. My childhood wasn't any more or less traumatizing than anyone else's. It was what it was, and it caused my mind to fracture irrevocably. The only thing that has made me different is that I was still pretty young when the idea was planted in my mind that I could have a relationship with my alters just like I had a relationship with the woman who was mentoring me, one that was built on understanding, compromise, trust, respect, and love. Any good psychologist will tell you that one of the great forms of torture is isolation. If you treat a human being like an animal, they will behave like an animal. For those of us who grew up trapped in an environment with abusers, being treated as less than human, one would think that we'd be the last ones to treat anybody else like that. However, because the so-called medical professionals are telling us to treat our alters like they are parasites to be destroyed, we treat them with the same contempt as we were treated. This blows my mind. Our alters helped many of us survive incredible circumstances. And the common response to this phenomenon in the medical community is one of ridicule and shame and, best case scenario, an urging by doctors to use any and all means to quiet the voices. Our brains did this incredible thing, making a big puzzle inside of a maze, inside of a vault, all to keep us safe. It's our job now to solve the puzzle. It's our job to take the time, do the work, build the relationships, and work toward a healthy unity.